For a great cup of joe, there's one thing you should know. Your morning brew can also be playful. Buff Boy Brewing guys make the temperature rise, and you surely feel naughty when you swallow our coffee. If you want some real heat, give your mouth a fine treat. You will want some more, rest assured. Buff Boy Brewing, you can't get enough of.
It's time for The Scribble, your weekly fix of celebrity chats, bizarre stories in the news, and basic random chatter with best-selling author and syndicated radio host Jeremy Bradley. Make sure your seat is in the upright and locked position and your barf bag is securely in place. Here's Jeremy Bradley.
Thank you very much, Larson. Jeremy Bradley here. This is The Scribble. Thank you so much for tuning in today. We're going to take a walk down memory lane today. More and more, I'm actually watching videos on YouTube where people are giving commentaries. We talked about that during the whole restaurant thing and why people aren't going to restaurants anymore and it's too expensive and whatever. And people just go on rants. And then it's interesting because people individually go on rants and then you have people making videos about those people. So what I mean is you've got somebody who's just at the drive-thru, right? And they set up their phone now. They're still sitting in the car. And they go on a rant about how expensive it was, right? Oh, these chicken nuggets or whatever the hell you get are, $17 and look at how small they are. And, and then somebody else goes and makes a compilation of all these people and they do a big summary as to here's why people don't go to restaurants anymore. And then they play that first person in the car, and then the next one. So I've been watching those, and I've mentioned to you about the decline of, people wanting to go to restaurants, and then the whole tipping thing, people just making videos about tipping. And then I've seen a bunch of them where people are making videos about why certain businesses are going under or why they're not doing very well. And so in the vein of that restaurant thing, there was one about McDonald's and how, they've raised prices, then they've tried to, spin it to make it look like they haven't. And then people are saying this and then people are saying that. And then YouTube shows me a Wendy's one. And so then I watch that one. And then I see one about Quiznos. And so then I watch that one. And then why KFC isn't doing really well. Now, this is the funny thing about these is I don't know whether or not this information is true, right? So I'm not saying that I'm believing it and going, oh, well, that's why. I'm just saying it's fascinating to, hear people's opinions. And then also if they do have facts. Now, obviously, if they can show me, screenshots and stories from the news or from, like Business Magazine or Business Insider or whatever it's called, then I put a little bit of merit into that information. But, when they go and say, well, they had, 3,000 restaurants. I mean, I'll take your word for it. I'm not saying that you're right, but, does McDonald's have 3,000 restaurants? Sounds about like they could, right? I mean, it's not a small company. But anyway, so YouTube always makes these connections, algorithms, whatever the hell it is. And so I've seen ones about why, such and such business has gone under or why there's, next to none. And so because I've talked about Party City here on the show a few times, or I've made references to it anyway. And then I also talked about working at Red Lobster when I was, I was 16 and 17. I worked there for almost, I was 16 and 17. And Party City, at least in the United States, right, is pretty much gone. And then Red Lobster, pretty much gone. And so I have some thoughts. Now, you have to remember that I worked at these places, 20, 25 years, 20, in the case of Red Lobster, almost 25 years ago. And, society has changed, right? But I think the writing was kind of on the wall even back then. So I'm going to explain what I mean coming up on the Scribble right after this.
Isn't it crazy that you wait for payday, but before you know it, you're strapped for cash again? It's time to stop blowing your money and become a smart spender with the book, The Official Guide to Being an American Cheapskate at cheapskatebook.com. Learn simple ways to cut costs at home every day and during special times of the year. Don't go broke at Christmas. Don't remortgage the house for a fancy vacation. The book is filled with tips to save you money throughout the year. Check out the best-selling book, The Official Guide to Being an American Cheapskate at cheapskatebook.com or on Amazon and iTunes.
Ever had something to get off your chest but never had the balls to say it? That's a load of crap. SpeakFreeWithJB.com is exactly what you've been waiting for. Your chance to tell it like it is and not care what anybody else thinks. Have your say on issues of the day. Join newspaper and radio columnist Jeremy Bradley as he tells it like it is. Hundreds of thousands of people have stopped by, including some well-known celebrities who have had a chat with JB and speak candidly about what's really going on in the world. You can join them too. Have a rant or a rave. Be brave and head on over to www.speakfreewithjb.com now.
Jeremy Bradley here, back on the Scribble. All right, so I guess we'll start with Red Lobster because I was 16 and 17, then I was 20-something when I worked at Party City. So we'll go with Red Lobster. Now, I got to tell you, remember, this would have been 1998 to 1999 because I graduated high school in 2000 and I was, anyway, so it was around that time. So again, at least 26 years ago, okay? Red Lobster was, I think we had 4 of them in our city in Winnipeg. 3 or 4 of them. And then right next to us was Olive Garden, same company. It was in the parking lot, basically. And so on a Friday or Saturday night, and I guess sometimes even on a Thursday, it was called Standing Line, and that was basically where you would wait in the lobby, right? And then they would give you that like vibrating coaster or pager, whatever you call it. Right, the thing that like lights up and starts shaking and breaks the table basically. If you're, and by the way, I've got to tell you this: we actually sometimes would put people in standing line and have them go sit in the lounge in the bar, just to kind of rack up a drink bill. If it was like let's say younger guys or whatever, we would kind of have them go into the bar because you knew that they would have some beers or whatever it was before they would go in. So we actually did that on purpose sometimes at that Red Lobster. But anyway, so when I was there, it was I was in high school, and a lot of the staff actually was also in high school with me. Well, they were a grade older. Anyway, so we were all, late teenage years. And then there were some people that were, 20s and 30s. It wasn't like this was just a big, kind of high school gang kind of a thing. But one of the things that I did mention on the show previously was the cleanliness in there was amazing. And I don't know that you would see that in most restaurants nowadays, just from kind of what I've experienced. And what I mean by that is, when I go to the restaurants where they go down the line and they put your toppings on, whether it's a sandwich or pizza or whatever it is, you can see that they, yes, they're wearing gloves when they're doing it, but then at the same time, you can also see them behind the counter pulling out their phone, and their phone is going to be dirty and whatever it is. And I've seen them, not even wearing gloves when they're handling the food. So it's like, oh, great, you just had your hand on your phone before you started to make my lunch. Oh, okay. So, it was just kind of crap like that. But at Red Lobster, yes, it did get, messy in the rush of things, obviously, because that's going to happen. You're going to have, something fall on the floor, and then it's going to get kicked under the counter just because, that's what happens. But I got to tell you, at the end of the night, so on the weekends we closed it, I think it was 11. You had that almost the entire. I was in the alley, so I wasn't in the kitchen where they were doing the food, and I wasn't in the dining room. I was in that midway point where they're coming and picking up the trays to take out to the dining room. So I was in the alley, which is where we would take the temperature of the food. We would put the sauces, like the containers of sauce on the plates. We would just make sure that it was dressed nicely. And from that area of the kitchen to the very back, which was the prep area, you had it hosed down. There was like a power spray. It was just, oh yeah, at the end of the night, Red Lobster. So that is the one thing that I will say was, the cleanliness in the back was, let me tell the people in Winnipeg, if you were going to Red Lobster back in the late 90s, early 2000s, you did not have to worry about cleanliness, okay? You were fine. I will tell you that for a fact, at least in the location that I was at. They did take it very seriously. And then the same thing even with food handling. It was every day of the week had a different colored dot or piece of tape the tape would have, like, let's say Monday was purple, Tuesday was blue, whatever it was. You had rolls of tape that if you went and put the sauces back in the one cooler, it was in a new container at the end of the night. See, we hated doing all this crap because it just meant more work for us, right? Now, in hindsight, I was kind of like, you know what, I appreciate that. But yes, you would switch the containers of the sauces, you would put that in a new one, and then you would have the date, because let's say it was Friday night, you'd put Friday on it. Depending on how it was, depending on what your system was, sometimes you would even put the date that it was the last day for it. So let's say the sauces, I'm just, again, making this up. So let's say the sauces, we'd open them on a Friday, and they were good for 2 days, so we would then put Sunday on it, meaning, but I think it was, you would put it was the day that it was put into that container. So the ranch dressing or whatever it was a Friday, and you would put the green sticker or the green tape on it for Friday, and it would go into the fridge or to the cooler overnight. And then it would be pulled out, and you would use that the next day, and then at the end of the night, transfer it into a new container. And so there was a lot of consistency with food handling, and so I did that was great at Red Lobster. At the same time, this was also when you had a smoking section in the restaurant. So we had it was a very nice dining room. If you've been to a Red Lobster 20 years ago or 25 years ago, you know that it was very nautical themed, where you had like lobster traps, in the ceiling, and netting, and like empty bottles, like it was a pirate ship almost, kind of a thing. And it was very, very ocean-like, very sea-like. And then we had what was called the upstairs, but it was really just kind of like a slight ramp up at the back of the restaurant, which was the smoking section, but we called it upstairs. And it was also totally open. So, I mean, even if you were sitting at a table that was not in the smoke, it was downstairs, basically the main level. You were basically sitting right beside the smoking section. Like, it didn't really make a difference, but it's kind of weird how people didn't really notice or make a big deal about things like that at the time. So the restaurant would be packed, and it was a very large restaurant. I don't know how many tables there were, but I would say there was so upstairs in the smoking section was probably, it was a big building. I mean, yeah, the smoking section was anywhere from at least 15 to 20 tables, and then the main area, the main floor, had to be at least 30 or 40 tables. I mean, it was a big place, and we had a lot of staff. So the fact that you would have standing line on a weekend, I mean, that really said how busy the place was. And, seafood isn't cheap, and it wasn't cheap back then. We did have unlimited, it was crab legs. Unlimited crab legs on, it might have been Thursdays or Mondays or something, just to kind of spike sales. So those nights were busy. But it was a place where you would come, at 6 o'clock or 6:30, and then we would have, the younger crowd that would come in, because in the bar we had, this was back in the day of those big-ass TVs, not the little flat screens and all that stuff now. So there was a TV in the lounge and the bar. Not that many people really would come to watch sports or anything on those. It just happened to be on, as a distraction or as entertainment. But it was, it was a place where you would go on Friday or Saturday night for dinner, and the food was good, the service was decent. So why did it go downhill is the big question. And I mean, I think really it's a matter of price, because you did get a lot of food. If you could get, it was called the CYOP, create your own platter, and you would get like a fish. So whether maybe you could get salmon, and then you would get a bag of the bag, we had bags of frozen vegetables that would be basically nuked and then throw that on the plate. And then you would get perhaps a baked potato. You would probably get a salad starter. So, you got a lot of food. And there was the buns. Everybody loved those Red Lobster buns, right? The cheese buns or whatever it was. So that, I think, was free. Just, basket was put on the table, and you can get more buns as the night went on. But I mean, the cost of it just ended up, it was just going up and up and up. And I think after a while, like, you have to remember that Red Lobster it didn't have the monopoly on seafood restaurants, but that was kind of the big name. And at least in Canada anyway, you started to have other seafood restaurants open. There's one called Joey's. Was it Joey's or Joey's Only? I'm trying to think, that opened. And then, you kind of just had other ones that weren't as expensive. Now, did they have live lobster and things like that? No. Not all of them anyway, not many. But I don't know that people were really that particular about having a live lobster. I think that, lobster tails that we had at Red Lobster were, I think some of them came frozen. So, people loved those as well. So I think the novelty of they would, when the line guys would have an order and they would say, lobster from the tank. And so I was, again, one of those people that would go and I'd have to scoop one out of there. Do people really want that anymore, right? Does it really matter to a lot of people? Oh, hey, my food was just killed or just boiled 10 minutes earlier. I don't think people care about that. So, you're looking at, $20 or $30 just for a lobster. I don't know what the cost would be today, but obviously it would go up. So that's one of those things where, maybe people are looking at it and going, I'm fine with even just getting a lobster tail because that's enough meat or, whatever in that, and that's fine. But even that's expensive, right? I mean, you can go to the grocery store now and get live lobster. I mean, you were able to do that back then, but if that's something that you really want, well, hey, I can go to the store and get it for half the price and just, there's really nothing to do when it comes to, you throw it in a pot. That's kind of really what you do. Like, there's not much preparation, you just sort of kind of like corn on the cob, right? You just, you peel it, and then you boil it or whatever, you put it in the boiling water, and then however many minutes later it's done. So, when you think about it that way, really, right? You can go and buy a lobster from the grocery store. So I think that that's kind of what ended up happening was, people were just sort of like, all right. And then when we had the Olive Garden beside us, that they were even more dead. We would go there because they were open a little bit later. We closed at 11, as I said, and then they would be open, I think maybe until 1. They had like a pool table and things in there. We didn't have that in the restaurant. So our staff would go over there and, we would drink or whatever. And yes, I was 17 and having a drink. But yeah, that restaurant closed before we did. And again, Olive Garden back in the day, it did have a bit of a, it felt like a fancy restaurant just because of the branding and the way it was designed, right? I mean, you went into Red Lobster, it wasn't like people were, not saying people were dressed up, but I mean, it was a little bit more of a fancier restaurant. It certainly wasn't fast food, definitely not. But yeah, I think with people being able to just, buy stuff like that at home, or you can go to a restaurant and just get, breaded fish or whatever it was. And the price of Red Lobster was just, a little much. And there was nothing unique about it. There was really nothing, it's not like you can't get, lobster is lobster. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's one thing to go and say, well, burgers are different because of the quality of beef or where it comes from, or if it's, frozen or for whatever it is. A lobster is a fucking lobster. So it's, it's not going to taste any different, so that's also a big part of it, I think, right? So yeah, I think that it just, it kind of fizzled out. It just wasn't, and I don't know that the younger generation, like I know my parents, maybe just because I worked there, but my parents were in there quite regularly. So you did have people that were in their 40s and 50s. That was I don't know many people who are in their 20s who are like, I want to go to a seafood restaurant. I want to, the younger crowd, and especially now with today's generation, wants either, the sports bar, the lounge, the trendy place. They want to go to where the servers have their tits out, and they want to go, and the shirts are skin tight, and the bartenders are hot, and things like that. Red Lobster wasn't like that. We had stupid fish, colorful fish shirts that we wore, and had to wear black dress pants, and it just wasn't, there's no way to really make that trendy. There wasn't. So when you look at the older generation, yes, they might have done really well nowadays with my parents who are in their 70s. But, at that point, my parents are looking at it going, I'm not spending $50, $60, $70 for a dinner for the two, like for my mom and dad. They're not going to do that. As it is, I think they probably just go to McDonald's or Wendy's when they order. They go to restaurants if they've got a gift card or something, but they're not going just because. I mean, they went to Red Lobster because the staff knew that they were my parents, and they basically got a staff discount when they went. So, anyway, tell me your thoughts. If you did go to Red Lobster or Olive Garden back in the day, what did you think of it? And why don't you go now? Did it close in your city? Like, what happened? Live, Live at jbonair.com. Talking about Party City when we come back on the Scribble right after this.
Who are the Kardashians feuding with now? What did that little thug Justin Bieber do this time? Who's getting hitched? And who's headed for Splitsville? Hear the latest celebrity news and gossip every day on Entertainment Wrap-Up. The good, the bad, the ugly, but mostly the ridiculously hilarious. It's all recapped in this daily segment at entertainmentwrapup.com. Have a laugh at the expense of the rich and famous when they take themselves way too seriously. It's 3 minutes of time-wasting fun at entertainmentwrapup.com. Check out Entertainment Wrap-Up at entertainmentwrapup.com. Brought to you by Speak Free Books.
We hear you chirping. Get scribbling. Tweet up the Scribble at The Scribble Show. Join the discussion with Jeremy Bradley. It's all going down right now on Twitter at The Scribble Show and at thescribbleshow.com.
JB here on this Scribble. So I got a job at Party City when I was about 21 years old, and I was taking a year or two off from high school, and then I was going to be saving up money so that I could go to college. I always wanted to be a journalist and, write for the newspaper, be on the radio, whatever it was. I knew that I wanted to do that. So I wasn't one of those students who was like, I don't know what I want to do in life. I did, but I also needed money to pay for it, right? So I was still at home living in the basement of my parents' house. And this is when you would get the newspaper and you would look at the career section on a Saturday, right? That was always kind of the big, thick section at the back. And you would just scan the columns and just, look at all the job ads. And so there was one that said Party City, which I'd never heard of. It was just opening in Winnipeg. Like, when I say just opening in Winnipeg, I mean the sign wasn't even outside the building yet. So that's how new. And so it was looking, all positions, hiring. Because I kind of knew how the newspaper industry worked, it was a big ad. So I thought, okay, they've got money. So, this is going to be a decent company. So I'd applied. And, you have to remember that, I was 21 years old. What was my work experience? Red Lobster, which, I got fired from. And then I think I worked at a clothing store, which I ended up quitting. And then a luggage store that I ended up getting fired from, too. I got fired from a lot of jobs. So not Party City, though, because it went out of business, and we'll get to that in a second. So I applied with my limited resume, but then I thought, what sort of, experience or work history do you need to have to work at a party store? So I sent it in. I faxed it, if I'm not mistaken, because that's what you would do back then. And I get a call back, and I answer it, and it's like, oh, would you like to come in on such and such date? We're going to be setting up the store, whatever. So I jumped at that because I thought, well, this is perfect, right? But in hindsight, I thought this is also a little bit strange because I wasn't called in for an interview. Now, I perhaps just thought, well, they don't have a store yet, so maybe there is kind of no place to do it. Right? If it's not even built and they don't have it. Yeah, I realized you could have just met at a restaurant or whatever, right? But whatever, I'm 20 years old, right? I don't know that. So I was kind of like, oh God, yeah, I can come in on, Monday at 9:00. So when I no interview, not even like a second call back and whatever, just, come at, 9:00 on Monday. So I get to the store, and as I said, it was just a big empty room. There was nothing. And there was probably about 20, 30 of us that were all brought in, and we were there to basically set up the store. So it was kind of labor at the same time, and then also stocking shelves, right? Like, it was a little bit of everything. We came in, like I said, it was literally an empty room. So the shelving and everything hasn't even been delivered or set up yet. So that eventually starts to come, or maybe it was already in the back, but it just wasn't brought out. And so we all kind of get to work. They start marking the floors as to, this goes here, this goes there. So we spent that week basically putting up all the shelving. Inventory was coming in, so we were putting up the inventory, and then the shelf labels and the aisle signs. What's down aisle 1, what's down aisle 2. The counters for the registers were in. We had this big balloon wall, and so in that week we basically started from beginning to end, building this store. Now, halfway through the week, though, the store manager was, going around and talking to people. And then I think what she was doing was she was kind of casually letting people go, meaning you were basically just brought in to help build this store. So again, I wasn't paying attention to shit like that, right? I was focused on doing the work, right? And so some of the people aren't coming back as the week goes on. That's where I was wondering, like, oh, Jim was really funny, but I don't see Jim today. And Barb was here, but she's gone now, right? So as we were making progress, we didn't need as many people because now there's less and less to do. So I'm like, oh, okay. So they were just here to set up the store. And then I thought, yeah, nobody's really said anything to me about, like, so am I not going to come in tomorrow then? Or like, how is this, when does it end for me? I don't really know. So then the store manager comes over to me and she's walking around and we're walking around and she says, I'd like to make you head cashier if you are interested. It's been really fun working with you. Everybody's having a laugh with you. It's, and I kind of just, I think we could work together. And, if you'd like to do that, that's kind of like you'd be sort of like the front end manager in a way, the head cashier. And I said, oh, totally. Yeah. Like that's awesome. Well, this is where the drama starts, folks. I didn't realize, but there were interviews with potential employees. And I was just brought in as one of the help set up the store and then we'll cut you loose kind of guys. That's what I was there for. So she had a bunch of, they were either teenagers or late teens or early 20s, females. I'm not going to use the term women because you'll hear why in a second. So she had gone and interviewed and sat down with them before this whole process. So they did go and sit down at whatever, a restaurant or in a mall food court or something like that to have those interviews. So I was just one of the extra people to come and, they needed some muscle. And, I'm a big guy, right? So she's having this conversation with me, and I guess it gets around to these catty bitches, if I may, that I was kind of, getting moved up, even though I'm an outsider. Get what I'm saying here, right? Because these gals were all bonding because they had interviews, and it's like, oh my God, I've been hired, and we're gonna be cashiers, we're gonna have fun together. And now all of a sudden, this homo dude, is coming in, and the store manager is raving about him, and there's bitterness and jealousy, right? So those kitties didn't make life easy for me. Let me just say it that way. So we set up the store that week, and then we opened not too long after that, right? I mean, once you're ready, there's no sense in waiting. So we have the grand opening, and it was very busy because we didn't, in Winnipeg, there wasn't a store like this before. I mean, you had dollar stores, but they didn't have the extent of the party supplies that they do now. And then once people got, saw all the different kinds of decorations and party things that you can get, you did start to see them more in dollar stores. So we, the tough thing for Party City was that it opened about a block and a half away from a store that was called Party Stuff, which was basically the exact same thing. Now, that company had been established in Winnipeg for many years prior, so it did seem a little bit weird because people would actually come into Party City thinking that they were at Party Stuff. Right? You're in the same neighborhood. You're literally, like I said, around the corner. You would hang a left at the intersection and then hang a right, and you were right at Party Stuff. Oh, yes. Yeah, that's how close. So it's one thing to have, two fast food restaurants side by side, but they're still a little bit different. We basically had the same things as them. Now, they also had rentals. So you would rent tables, you would rent chairs, you would rent whatever. So people would come into Party City, they would say that they've rented stuff, and we're like, no, you didn't. And they would just leave. And we were actually told to say to people, oh, this is Party City. Yeah, what is it called? I don't know where that is. And I'm sorry. I don't know where that is. Meanwhile, we've all been in there. We've been scoping it out and checking how they have displays and how they do things. But yeah, you're not going to go and tell them where the competition is. I mean, sometimes you would, just based on the situation. So Party City did really well in our first Halloween season because that's where a big chunk of the money came in. The Halloween costumes, the accessories, right? It wasn't just a matter of a one-time, you bought the costume and then you needed the makeup, you needed the wig, you needed the mask, you needed all this other crap. So it was an easy upsell when people were buying Halloween costumes. So we'd opened in the spring, and then summer was pretty good because that was, again, the first kind of summer with people doing barbecues, right? So they're going to get the plastic plates and then, just different things. And that was also wedding season, too, and we had invitations. So you would have people coming and order very expensive invitations. And also their accessories. I mean, you'd get the ring, you get the pillow, you'd get the feathery pen, you'd get the guest books, you'd get the confetti, you'd get all that stuff. So we did really well for that first summer, and then also for wedding season, and then fall came around, and right, I think it was either August or September was when we really pushed out the Halloween stuff, and that started to go right away, and then we had a little bit of an overlap with Halloween and Christmas. And Hanukkah, yeah, we did have it was a smaller section for Hanukkah, but there was a lot of Christmas stuff. And so that Halloween we did awesome, it was great. And then Christmas was pretty good. And so Party City ended up going into receivership within about a year of opening in Canada, at least in Winnipeg where I was. I think some of the stores were open in Canada a little bit longer. And so, at the time, when you're 20s and you don't really understand business and the inner workings of it, you don't, on the surface, it's like, well, we were busy. So why, what's the problem? What happened? And I ended up being moved up to assistant manager during my time there. So I did get to see the reports as to what sales were. And it was just kind of tough because, we're looking, the management team is looking at the daily sales and things like that. And you're doing $800 in sales for a big store, like it was. And so now I think about my own e-commerce stores, with our men's swimwear company and our coffee company. I mean, $800 for our swimwear company, that's a really bad day. So if you look at that, and that's just an e-commerce, like that's not even a big setup where we've got building and expenses, right? Where you're going to have rent and all this other crap. So, you're kind of going $800 for this big store. That's not very good. And then next day is 700 and something. And then a weekend you might do 1,000. So rent in this massive building is a lot. The employees, your labor costs, manpower, or whatever, was also a lot. And, the markup on products was ridiculous as well. But, as I said, you started to have dollar stores and, your Walmarts, your Targets, your, it was primarily dollar stores that were then starting to sell packages of balloons and napkins and plates. And so people are like, why do I have to spend $5 at Party City when I can go... Remember, this was when dollar stores actually had stuff for $1. Remember those old days? And so, yeah, I mean, why am I spending something for just basic red plates when I can go and get them here? And then they started to get the licensed ones at dollar stores, right? So you would have the patterned ones that say Happy Birthday, or the Barbie, or the X-Men, or whatever characters were around at the time. I don't recall them now, but Garfield or Clifford and Power Rangers or whatever. I mean, we had all those things at Party City, but then you're able to get them elsewhere. And then Walmart moves into the neighborhood and they've got a party aisle, and there's and so I think what ends up happening though is that generation, right? So the people who would have been in their 30s at the time, they were the ones, or I guess late 20s or 30s, were having the big parties for their kids, right? That's when you were getting the princess piñata and the big balloon bouquet. And then the generation changes, so now those people are in their 40s and their kids are older, and now you're going to have the new generation, the cell phone generation, right? The social media generation, and they're not doing the big... maybe they did Barbie a couple summers ago just because of the movie and the popularity of that. But they're not doing that for their kids anymore. Right now it's like, it's going to be TikTok videos and stuff for a kid's birthday. It's not the big, there's not the big loot bags and there's not all that kind of stuff. My brothers didn't do that. Their kids are in their late teens now. And I don't remember them ever having birthday parties where the kids got goodie bags. That just wasn't... They would maybe go to like a trampoline I can't, like a trampoline, is it called a trampoline park? Do you know what I'm talking about? Those different kinds of activities, right? Or like an indoor rock climbing place or go-karts or something like that. So they were going out somewhere to do that. And you're not decorating somebody else's place, right? You're not going to go and get all these balloons and then take them to another place. The whole thing is, well, you know what, we're going to go go-karting, and that's what we're doing. Did my nephews care about balloon bouquets and shit like that? No. And so that's what happens, right? Is that tradition from the generation where, I mean, my parents didn't really have goodie bags and things like that for us when we would have our birthday parties, for the guests, I mean. So then we aren't going to do that. I don't have kids, but we aren't going to do that with our kids, right? So it's not, that tradition is not being passed down to the next generations. So my brothers, who are a little bit older than me, one's in his late 40s and one's mid 40s, their kids are now teenagers, and not that they're parents yet, at least that I know of. I hope they're not. They shouldn't be. They don't care to do stuff like that. They're not, you know. So I think what it is just a matter of the shifting generations. It's just not something that was carried on. And, you know, Party City, I think also too had some bad business decisions in the sense that their ordering was a little bit off. They didn't go regional with ordering. So when our football team in Winnipeg was in the finals, you know, we wanted them to order licensed team balloons and plates and things like that because they were available. They didn't do things like that. And so then we took it upon ourselves. Let's do a blue and gold section. We'll do, you know, we can hang some balloons. We'll make it look like it's a Winnipeg Blue Bombers, you know, section, but nothing had branded stuff. They just didn't get things like that. So they didn't look at regionally what was going on. Or if our team was hosting the final game, right? Like, let's say the Super Bowl is in your city, right? So when that came to Winnipeg, we should have green and white for the one team that's in it, or the actual team products. You know, they didn't adapt to things like that, and that's where you lose it, because where can you find that stuff? Walmart. Walmart's going to have all those deals with the NHL or whoever it was. They're going to get the products in there, and they'll get them fast. And so people would come in, and this was the craziest thing. Party City was right down the street from the football stadium. So people would easily be coming into the store before the game. Hey, do you guys have Bombers shirts? Hey, do you have Bombers, you know, this and that, or those foam fingers with the Bombers, whatever? Nope. Didn't have any of them. And you know what they would ask us? Oh, do you know if that party stuff has? Seriously. And as they were going down the street, party stuff was in that direction too. So it was just a right and then a left, or a left and then a right. And they're at party stuff. And they're even closer to the stadium now at this point. So there were a lot of business decisions that didn't work out. So what happened was, after the first year, we were told as management that, you know, there's going to be a receivership thing happening. So we weren't allowed to tell the staff. I didn't really know exactly what that meant, but, you know, somebody's going to, basically the company's going to be shutting down and somebody's going to be here to liquidate the place. And if there's a buyer, there's a buyer, which, what was the chances of that? So we were told to, what was it called? Prepare for the worst, hope for the best was the line that we were given. Yeah, isn't that great? So, of course, we're trying to be hopeful for the staff, and we're just selling out stuff. I mean, we were just, you know, and then, wouldn't you know it, we were told that the company was bought. It was bought by some people in Toronto, and they weren't going to use the name Party City anymore. They were going to use the name, get this, everybody, they were going to use the name Let's Celebrate. That was the name of the store. Let's Celebrate. So when we were told that, the three of us managers, when we were told that, we said right off the bat, yeah, not going to be good. So the great thing was that in receivership, we were then taken over, and we were allowed to keep the staff and everything. It's not like we were all thrown out or whatever. They said, you know what, you guys you were there literally from day one, setting up the store. So, you know, we'll keep you guys because you know your audience, you know the neighborhood, you know the city, you know, like, okay. So they wanted to do a rebrand. By that, I mean new logo, new logo, new color scheme. So inside the walls were painted green. They had these giant graphics put up along the walls at the top. We disagreed with that. Now, I realize that you do want to make it a different kind of a feel, but at the same time, people know where Party City is, and it didn't really matter that it looks different now because they liked Party City, and they're just going to keep coming back because of the experience that they had there. So I appreciate the new identity and trying to distance yourself from it, but you actually needed to ride the coattails of Party City to kind of, hang on to that. So they spent so much money painting and rebranding and changing shelving and doing all this other crap, and so that was a big chunk of money at the same time. And again, they didn't get it. They made decisions from Toronto. They didn't really come into our stores very often. When they did, it was a matter of, okay, we're going to walk around, we're going to look, change this, not this. We're doing this in Toronto, it works there, do it here. And we just said, Winnipeg is a very different city in the terms of people aren't as free with their money. I was Winnipeg cheapskate in the Winnipeg Free Press for many years because Winnipeg is known as a cheap city. I wrote a book called The Official Guide to Being a Winnipeg Cheapskate. Because people are penny pinchers, and so you can't expect the Toronto mentality to work in Winnipeg. It's just not the same market. It's not. You can't. This is not going to be a high-end premium party supply store. That's not going to fly in Winnipeg. Listen to us. We're all born in this city. We all know this city. Please, this is not Toronto. They're very, very different. And wouldn't you know it, they did not listen to us. So it's going to be our first holiday season coming up, okay? And so what they did was they were doing this big promotion where you would get a box of, they were called Celebrations chocolates. These things that we sold in the store for, I think they were between $8 and $12. They were somewhere in that range, I don't remember. But if you, either spent enough or if you got, they were like postcards that we had sent in the mail. We were to ask people for the last part of it was in Canada, it's called a postal code. In the States, it's a zip code. We would ask people for their postal code, and then that's how we knew where to target flyers and, which areas of the city people were not coming from that we could target, and the ones where they are coming from so that we can send different things because we know they're coming in. And so there were certain areas that were getting these postcards that were, if you spend whatever amount, you get a free box of chocolates. Here's the thing, though. We didn't have the chocolates. So we were then having to give these tins of, it was chocolate, but it was not the one that was advertised. It was a different brand altogether, but it was expensive. So we didn't have the promotional chocolates. So now we're having to give away more of these, a more expensive item in exchange, right? Because you can't give something less, right? If your chocolate is your giveaway is an $8 product, you can't go and say, well, here's a $3 product instead. No, you got to go up, right? Because you got to look better. You can't, right? Are people going to be really upset where it's like, well, did you want the $15 tin instead? Oh my God, yeah, totally. Why not, right? And so we ended up blowing through so many of those. So the fact that you couldn't even get the promotion right at the holidays, and now you're having to give away, you don't have the product that you banked on, and then you're giving away the expensive product for free when you should be selling that one. And that's where we were like, these people are just not, it's just not working. And so Let's Celebrate ended up folding. It was less than a year. I think it was less than a year. It was really just really bad decision making. So now here you are in the year, this would be 2002 or 2003. Again, still before the days of social media. So, we weren't that deep into the whole cell phone fascination or addiction at this point. But like I said, this is when you had that generation who was eventually kind of, going to the dollar store, finding other ways to do it. And the other thing was too, you have to remember that, people were going in a mall, and then Walmarts and other stores, Targets or whatever, were being built in malls, right? They were the anchor stores in a mall. So if I can just go to Walmart and get a package of red balloons, I don't need to make that special trip to Party City anymore, right? Walmart sells the red plates and red napkins and red balloons and red forks and all those things. So I'm going to go and buy them for $1.50 there and not buy the big package. And that's, I think, what ended up happening. And, like I said, if they're not having, if I go there before the football game and I want Blue Bomber stuff, and they don't have it, well, then I'm not going to go there again next year and ask if they have it, right? I'm just going to write them off altogether. Oh, well, they didn't have it, so I'm not going to go back there. That's the customer mentality. So, and then just to hear recently, was it last year or 2 years ago when Party City closed in the United States? And apparently I've seen it that there's stores in Canada again. So it's kind of weird that, Party City's originated in the United States and it's gone. And then it was in Canada 20 years ago. 25 years ago? Yeah. And then it was gone for a big stretch of time and now is back. And it's actually in Canadian Tire stores, which is a big kind of, Canadian Tire was more of an automotive store early on, but now it's kind of more household and it's got vacuums and pet supplies and outdoor gardening stuff. And so they've kind of got a little bit of everything now. And they've got Party City in some of the stores. They've got aisles of balloons and things like that. But again, there are some standalone stores, but they have Party City as part of a larger store. So there's the Party City section of the big box store. So it's a little bit different, right? They're not going to be paying rent for this new brand. It's already in the existing store. That's making a shit ton of money. And then there are some standalone stores which are in, strip malls. I don't know how well they're doing. It's funny because I was laughing when I did see it. I thought, oh my God, and I'm still in touch with the other managers from, 25 years ago. And I said, like, would you guys go back there if it was the three of us running it? And they're happy in their jobs now. And I mean, I retired 5 years ago. So for me to go and work in a retail job, but if it was with that crew and we could kind of have a say and have some control and be like, hey, you know what? We were the OG crew 25 years ago. We're back. We would have fun. But I can't imagine all of a sudden putting on a smock because that was basically what you had to wear at Party City. When I became assistant manager, though, I was able to not wear it. Yeah, that was a big... When you're a manager at 20 years old, that was kind of a big deal, right? So, anyway... Send me your thoughts live, live at jbonair.com, live at jbonair.com. I was going to talk about Sears, but I didn't get to that. But tell me if there's a store or a chain or company that you just, you loved it back in the day, and then it's either not around anymore or it just suddenly disappeared, and you were like, where the hell did it go? Live, live at jbonair.com. My name is Jeremy Bradley. This is The Scribble. Thank you so much for tuning in. I will talk to you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.
Want more Scribble? Check out thescribbleshow.com for past shows, celebrity interviews, cheapskate tips, and more. That's at thescribbleshow.com and on Twitter at The Scribble Show. The Scribble is a speak-free media presentation.
If you want some real